welcome everyone to GDC, I guess, if this is your first day. Congrats on missing a day of GDC. If you don't know who I am Felix. I am a scout for Fellow Traveler, and my talk today is discoverability from day zero. We're going to talk a little bit about discoverability in general and what that means to me as a scout specifically, and then we're going to go into a few more details. I'll do a lot of rambling, I'm sure, and then hopefully you'll have a takeaway at the end of it. So, cool. Who am I? This slide is a lot for me to look at. I am currently a producer on Neocab, Tunic, and Sable. Those are all indie projects, small scale, 8 people or smaller. And I am producer and marketing and PR for both Finji and Polytron. I'm a scout for Fellow Traveler, which is a small publisher located in Australia. We focus mainly on narrative games and narrative experiences. I'm also a publishing consultant with Panic, with Nick Sutner, who's somewhere in the room. I can't see any of you anymore. They're waving. Great, there, you did it. And they're doing Untitled Goose Game, which is really lovely as well, and it's an honor to work with Nick and Panic on that. And previously, I was on things such as Towerfall Ascension and Oxenfree, and I worked with Iron Galaxy in a lot of different ways as well. So, done a lot of stuff, but today we're going to focus mainly on my experience as a scout and how discoverability plays into that role, and publishing in general, and for developers pitching to publishers. So, okay, discoverability. Let's start with a bit of what discoverability is, and before I get to my definition even, I'll say that a lot of discussion and discourse about discoverability has been focused on post-launch. At least in my experience. We tend to put it on platforms to solve discoverability, and I'll be really clear, I could talk for much, much longer than 25 minutes on discoverability on platforms and saturation of market and what all that looks like post-launch. But for right now, I want to come at this from the perspective of a scout, someone who gets to see a lot of pitches before launch, obviously, and then has to determine both the viability of a project to ship and its market potential. So what do I mean by discoverability in this context? What is the ability of someone who knows nothing about you or your game to find out both that it even exists and also what is it? So discoverability is this in the whole, but we're going to break it down quite a bit in the next 20 minutes. I can't believe I only have 20 minutes to do this. Wild. Okay. So phases of discoverability. Let's break it down a little bit and how I approach the potential of discoverability in a project when I'm looking through a deck. This one, Reach, is where I see the most push right now. It can take lots of forms, but I think the most common is past success or public champions with high social media presence, for example, like you have lots of followers on Twitter or you have a big community from a previous game. Reach is extremely useful. You should think of it as a multiplier on discoverability in general. I think this is a big reason why a lot of developers are looking for publishers again in 2019 compared to earlier, 2011, 2012. They know their reach isn't exactly what it could be, and they want to hand that off to someone who is a better multiplier. Findability. So it's a little trickier. Findability is a little trickier. It's the step that happens after seeing, say, like a tweet of a super gorgeous game, a GIF, let's say. But then where do I go to find out more? If it's just a GIF, can I click on a profile or link? Where is that info, right? So that's findability is the next step. Accessibility. Oof, this one is definitely the scariest of all the points here, in my opinion. I define it like this. How much info do I need to have enough knowledge to make an informed decision as to whether I like your game, and most importantly, whether I'm going to buy it or support it? And for me, as a scout, it's whether we're going to sign it, right, in this context. How do you know when you've informed someone to the point of hooking them? Have you done it within their attention span? That's really big. And is the information you've given them clear and representative of the experience, or at least the experience you want them to have? I know that it's a little harder pre-launch to describe a game, but we'll go into that in a second. Okay, so take these and let's talk about some dangerous assumptions that I see a lot. Developers in general contacting me, submitting decks, submitting pitches. The first one is definitely the conflation of reach and discoverability. It's super important and it applies to a lot of us, whether you've made a game in the past or not. Reach is just not discoverability. And I would say it actually applies even more to us with social media followings and previous project communities. It's not to say it can't help, right? So like if you've made a game in the past and you have a huge community, that is obviously not a downside. That's a huge help. But it's not one and the same. Reach is useful for pushing marketing materials and hopefully means that you'll have people who will champion your game, both on the consumer and the business side because you have a reputation. How to get champions is a whole other talk that Nick Sutner is going to give on Thursday at 4 p.m. I highly suggest everybody go to that one if you can. It's super, super useful, so please check that out. I won't go into it so that I leave it for you next, sorry. But anyway, reach doesn't necessarily guarantee that the design of your game and your vision is accessible or discoverable to anyone who matters. Okay, the second step is a step in discoverability, right? And I think it used to be this. I think like a lot of discoverability was when there were only a few thousand games on Steam, say, or you had, like X many indies, you could measurable amount of indies on a platform, putting up a Steam page and a website and a Twitter was definitely enough. It's just not enough now. It's tough to just end it there. So you'd be surprised how many people check the box. Now they're like, okay, I have a Steam page, I have a website, I did it, I'm discoverable. But that goes in hand with this next one, which is that discoverability is passive. This is an assumption that a lot of us make when we work on super, super small teams. I have a lot of sympathy for this one because I think that talking about this kind of stuff takes up an immense amount of mental space. Even just thinking about when you're making a game by yourself or on a small team, what it takes to be seen and how you're going to reach either an audience or a partner, such as a publisher. It's so easy to say, well, I did everything that I was told in 2011, all these things, I checked off these boxes, I have a Steam page and I have a Twitter and a website, why aren't I being seen? And I don't have a clear answer for that beyond it's just not enough anymore. It really is not passive. It needs to be active constantly and you need to be reaching out to people all the time. So again, another really dangerous assumption. It's just a piece of the puzzle in general that discoverability, findability and discoverability aren't the same. Okay. I could talk about the next one for ages, but I won't. This one can't be assumed at all, and I think I see it a lot. You probably have seen pitches like this before. It's not the pitch that really worries me anymore. I used to do a whole talk on why you shouldn't use an elevator pitch that is like, I'm making Minecraft meets Papers, Please. And that was true, I think, at one point. And now I think that it's a little less dangerous on certain levels. Like, I think you can use shorthand quite a bit, or depending on who you're speaking to, this is not a problem. The danger is assuming that you can or already do have their audiences. And you might be surprised again at how many pitches I get where they're saying, I'm making Papers, Please meets Minecraft, therefore all the people that play either of those games automatically know about my game or will know about it very easily. And that, again, oh boy, that's a whole can of worms that I could go into and I won't. So dangerous assumption. Shorthand. Okay. Shorthand can be super, super useful, but also really dangerous. If you're 1,000% certain that everybody in the room knows the shorthand you're using, like, I mean, common game dev terms, or even genres like roguelike or something, then you're fine, right? But if you're not sure, you risk losing people right away. Accessibility is super tricky, and shorthand is pretty binary in whether it works or not. Well, that's exciting. But when you're using it, are you actually communicating why your game is different from every other game that uses the term you're using, such as roguelike? Or are you just alienating an entire audience off the bat, right? When you're pitching to, say, a narrative studio, please use all the narrative shorthand you want, right? But also arm us with context for that shorthand. Make sure that we know what you're talking about in a larger spectrum, and make sure that other people are understanding you. Not all shorthand is useful. All I can say there is use shorthand with caution and with an appropriate audience. So these are all the don'ts, like really common don'ts I see, right? The next slide is sort of safer assumptions. The reason I wrote it this way is that, and I'm going to preface this with a bit of a ramble, I'm sorry. I scrapped this talk from this slide forward probably 4 times last year. It's been really, really tough. The industry changes all the time, right? I mean, everything is constantly changing, and major platforms are making huge announcements, and the way we experience shipping a game changes all the time. And that's super scary, right? Like, in addition to being a scout, like I said, I'm a developer, so I get to see sort of both sides of that coin, and it is really terrifying. It's been super hard focusing on this talk in general while so many different announcements are being made, especially like the way games are going to be sold in the future and all these like sort of new platform ideas, etc. So please understand that these assumptions are safer, not necessarily a tutorial. If I had more time, I might have been able to do more, but here we are. I have to say that designing with discoverability in mind is more important now than it, I believe, ever has been. If you can't start testing your vision and its discoverability potential from day 0, the risk of designing a game that is inaccessible and undiscoverable is much, much higher than it was in 2011. What I mean by that is there are tons of developers making games now, indie games specifically, and in order to know if your design and vision is accessible, I don't think we can afford to make the game first and hope that it's accessible later. We have to start doing it from day 0. We have to communicate visions from the start, and testing that communication to make sure it's accessible is essential to the process. I know this is super vague. All I can do right now is try to drive home the takeaway that this stuff is important. I'd love to caveat with, I'm not you, I don't hold your vision. And if you're already working on a project, I'm certainly not your dedicated game designer that you've definitely hired. So I've come to realize that I can't give much universal advice that applies to every project, but I can talk about some things in the abstract. So discoverability is proactive. It's on us as developers now, and to find partners such as publishers. It's on scouts to make sure that we are seeking out projects that are close to discoverable but probably need a little bit of help. It's all about these partnerships that we can create and flourish with from. We have to use our reach and make sure we're pairing with the right people, basically. But it's just not enough, right? That's a multiplier. So you need to be able to make sure that your design is accessible from the get-go in order to take advantage of that. Discoverability is fluid. I was told recently that there was definitely, I don't remember it, but I was told recently that there was a point in time where Twitter was an excellent tool for discoverability. It probably had something to do with hashtags back in the day. I don't remember ever using those, but I know it happened. I definitely believe that has changed, and that's just an example of how we have to make sure the tools we're using and the multipliers we have are effective. So we have to pay attention to how the market's shifting. Who is looking for what? What kind of games and what kind of audiences are platforms seeking and focusing their attention on? And that might be different now than it was 5 or 10 years ago, right? Like, we all have an idea in our head of what kind of audience comes to a specific platform and what kind of publisher publishes a certain type of game. But pay attention to those shifts and do a little bit of research. I know that sounds really 101, but it's something that takes a lot of mental space, and I think it's deeply, deeply worth doing early, because if you try to leave it until later, it's much, much harder. Okay, I don't think I've discussed accessibility enough in general in my life, and definitely not in this talk. So we can talk about it a little bit more here. Your product is accessible if it takes relatively low effort from the listener to understand, and then be equipped to make a decision on continuing to engage or not. Of course, post-launch, that gap is pitch, think, buy. But if you're pitching to a publisher, it's pitch, think, learn more, right? That's all you can hope for. I'm going to assert that the only way to make sure your game and design are accessible is by pitching it to people and testing the reactions. And I definitely don't just mean other game developers. It's super, super easy for developers in general, especially at GDC, to get caught in the mindset of, but I have so many people who love my idea, it must be really good and accessible. But if all those people are fellow developers and you've never tested the game out on anyone else, you're doing yourself and your game a huge disservice. So my advice on this one is, I don't know if you have this, but I do, that uncle at Thanksgiving who approaches you and says, I have a great idea for an app, it's going to make us $1 million, and it makes me want to shrivel up into a raisin of a human before dinner even happens. That's who you have to pitch to. And I don't mean he needs to like the game, and I don't even mean that he has to like deeply understand it. He will give you an excellent sense of what sort of attention span someone who isn't already in your dedicated circles or even interested in games has. And that's the goal, is to know what that attention span is. Because if you can make your game accessible, if you can make your pitch, forget the game, it's not about playing it, even your pitch from day zero, if you can make it accessible to him during dinner at Thanksgiving, you've done it. Like that's the measure, right? And I think accessibility in general is probably the strongest point that gets you a publisher. It's what tells me as a scout, okay, we can talk to an audience about this game, and that audience, even if it's niche, is going to understand and be excited about what you're making. I will say Becca Saltzman did a talk yesterday, I believe, I might be wrong on that, that covered pitching and how to do that to publishers. It was yesterday, right? Yeah, thank you, John. I highly recommend checking that one out. She sees a lot of pitches like I do, and I don't want to overlap with her too much, so I won't go into pitching to publishers on a detailed level, but that talk probably will arm you with a lot of details on how to make an accessible pitch in general. I really wish I knew a way to ensure accessibility beyond telling you to talk to annoying Uncle Jerry and going through each and every one of your pitches, right, to make sure you're all making products that have accessible cores. Or even if I could define for you now, so that in 2 or 3 years we can all agree the pitch is still accessible and desirable, I can't. But it does bring me to my favorite slide that is in all my decks. Unpopular opinions. Things I don't say on Twitter anymore. Okay. I don't think you're pitching your creative vision, so please stop trying to communicate that vision. I think that your creative vision is deeply important, and it is yours, and it's something that not everyone can understand. Therefore, I think you are actually pitching a product inspired by your creative vision. And so the thing that has to be discoverable is not your creative vision. And I think a lot of people get stuck in that initial loop where they're like, but you just don't understand. If only you could see my vision, you would understand why this is such a good game. A really big part of that is not pitching a product inspired by that creative vision. I think that there are lots of people probably in the world that can help you with that. I mean, there are PR people, and there are designers, and there are all sorts of people in the world, but if you don't have contact with them, this one becomes very, very, very difficult. If you're isolated in some way, this one's very difficult. You can really get stuck in your own head over it. I also believe heavily that publishers and champions are more necessary now than ever. I think that pairing with a publisher who even sees your creative vision in some way can lead to you having a product. You just have to convince them of that, and that's where accessibility comes into play. I also strongly believe that, well, this is math, but I strongly believe that multipliers on 0 still equal 0. It doesn't matter if your reach is 1 million Twitter followers. If they don't understand anything and they're not going to champion your game, that multiplier is just multiplying 0, and it's very frustrating. I see a lot of people doing it a lot of the time, and it breaks my heart, but So these unpopular opinions, I just need to put this in here. You know, I'm okay with it, by the way, if you don't want to make money. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm saying that your pitch needs to be something that an audience can imagine spending currency on, and that currency can be attention, money, time, all three. At a high level, it's kind of irrelevant. You're going to use different language for each of those currencies, but the mentality has to stay the same. I'm designing with this accessibility in mind so as to communicate it easily and effectively. So pitch a product. Please, 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 please pitch a product. Whether it'll make money or not, that's fine. Okay, what does anything that I just said mean? Turn your creative vision into a plan for a product. Not necessarily a product. I get that there are steps in between, right? Please try to turn it into a plan. This will ensure discoverability, at least from a publisher's point of view. Seeing that you have a plan at all for a vision into a product is going to be massive for us. Take it from day zero, outline a plan. I can't go over all of this in this talk. I'm already at 21 minutes, which is so tragic. But this is why things like design documents, even if they're just a stream of consciousness, are crucial. You have to hone your vision down until Jerry at Thanksgiving dinner can understand it, or at least can give you 30 seconds of his time, and you can retain that, right? Yes. I don't know how to emphasize this enough. Jerry is good, a good start. Uncle Jerry at Thanksgiving is a good start. I just need you to test it on everyone you know. Once you've got like your design, you're like, okay, I have this vision, I love it. I'm gonna bring it down to something I think I can communicate. You have to test it on literally everybody you know. And I know that's scary, especially with as many games are coming out right now. There's like, developers are loath to share their ideas and are really scared about doing that. But if you're pitching to people who have nothing to do with games, it's much lower risk of like another fellow designer running off and making your game, right? I know we all have that worry because we're all trying to make a living, but I really do believe that we can't afford anymore to hold it so precious and then to make the game and then to find out once we launch it that nobody understands it, right? Discoverability isn't the end result of who saw your game at launch. It's much more than that, and that part feels pretty important to me, so I'll throw up on the slide of its own. Sorry, I forgot to put it here. But, oh, no, I'm stupid. I forgot the most important part of the slide. If you're having a tough time communicating how a player interacts with your game, you might have a design problem. It will feel like a communication problem, right? But I urge everyone to take a step back again. If you're testing it over and over again and there's a block, it might actually be a design problem from day zero, not necessarily a problem with just your pitch or someone else understanding your vision. That one's super, super intense. Okay, in conclusion. It's not the end result of who you saw your game at launch. Discoverability is the quality, process, and design by which your game holds potential for people to see it at every phase of development. And I believe strongly that this starts at day zero and relies on a plan for a product, not just a vision, and that gets me in trouble all the time. But this is how I feel. There we go. It's there. I really want you to think about this as making us, especially scouts, believe in not just you, but also your product. And if you can't do that from the beginning, it's just going to be much, much harder to do it later on. So, I'm kind of the end. I wanted to leave room for questions. We're at 25 minutes, I believe. That only leaves 5 minutes for questions, and 25-minute talk isn't much. At the end of the day, I would love if the only thing you take away from this is don't be afraid of making a product. It'll empower your vision to reach the most people. That would be the most discoverability you can possibly get, for sure. And I urge you to check out both Becca and Nick's talk. And I did look at the schedule. I'm up against some really amazing people in this slot. I'm so glad for the Vault because I think you should probably check out everybody else's talks today too. So that's it. It seemed like it went by really fast. There it is. Cool. I can't see any of you, so if you have questions, I have no idea how I would know. No, none. I don't know, I can't see, so. Oh, there's a mic. Okay, perfect. No, then, we're good. I'm gonna drink this boxed water. It's very weird. It tastes like cardboard. All the mics went off. Okay, hi. No, there we go. Never mind.
What would be what would good aspects of a elevator talk be?
Elevator pitch. Okay, so this is a whole other talk, and I've done some cool elevator pitches. I think there's actually a really good elevator pitch talk this year. If I'm not, I have to look it up again. But so from a publisher's perspective, an elevator pitch is much more than the consumer pitch that you're going to give. You have a lot more space and time, and you really do need a deck. Like, I don't think I've ever signed a game that had just an elevator pitch in my life. I've signed plenty of games, but they're all full decks. And so the beauty of talking to a publisher is not that you have to have a one sentence that describes your genre, and of course, like, I could talk about like genre and hook and theme and narrative, like whatever it is that you think needs to go in your vision or needs to be communicated from your vision. For a publisher, a deck is incredibly important. There's no way you can communicate to me whether you're designing with discoverability in mind in general or whether you're designing with an audience in mind even, except through an entire deck that outlines your vision. And that's where I would say, sorry, I'm deferring the question, but that's where I would say definitely go to, you can't go to it, it was yesterday, it's the past. But look up Becca's talk, because I think that's gonna help quite a bit, yeah. And elevator pitches it feels like now it's a little easier than it used to be in that we have a little more space to talk to consumers. There's like a little more, you can gain a following on Twitter, and you can have a Facebook group and stuff like that where you can discuss more. But as of right now, from my perspective, an elevator pitch just isn't enough. So yeah, doing a whole deck is what's really important. Yeah, sorry, that was kind of a non-answer. What? You tweeting things? All right. Oh.
I got a question. So one thing I want to ask is, when you're going around to publishers trying to get them to see your game, and you're sending lots and lots of emails, a lot of publishers I know get hundreds of emails a day and can't really sort through them all. What would you say your tips are for having your best shot at like getting a response from publishers?
Awesome question. Badger? No. Do bug, right? Like, the thing is, when I get hundreds of emails a day, oftentimes things do slip through the cracks, right? Following up on an email is, like, not a bad thing to do. I think a lot of us think of it as a bad thing. I think many, many people are like, well, I sent an email in October, I didn't hear back. I sent a new email in December, I didn't hear back. Threading is very powerful. Responding to your email and following up on it with the same subject line is gonna put it in a thread in my Gmail inbox, and it's really, really powerful. It also is a great indicator as to, when I was super busy, so I can look back and say like, oh, I did see this, right? The chances are I did see it, or that a scout did see it. It's just that at the moment it wasn't the priority, right? Hearing back is really, really tough. Like, it is a difficult thing. But I think that getting involved, a lot of publishers have communities now, and getting involved in that community is also really awesome. So, for example, Fellow Traveler has a Discord, and they have a whole community of people who are playing their games. And if you can show, any interest in the community that Fellow Traveler, for example, or any publisher is cultivating and partake in that, it might be a little bit easier for them to take notice. That's not me saying like, DM everybody all the time. But it is saying don't be afraid to do it, right? And you'd be surprised how many people approach me at a convention and say like, oh, I emailed you last year, but I never heard back, so I just didn't think anything of it. And I'm mortified, first of all, right? I mean, I'm a human and I miss things, but yeah, I really do think that if that initial email had all the things in it, right, which is to say, I need some form of hook. So if your game is beautiful, please send screenshots. If your game has a strong narrative hook and you want Fellow Traveler to publish it because it was like other games they've published, mention that, right? Make it really easy for me to find out more about your game. So that's where that initial findability comes into play, where it's like, put up a Twitter, put up a website, send me a bio about you. Like, so selling yourself and selling your game are one and the same at that point. So you have to be able to package it all so that it takes me less than 5 minutes to click through things and find things, right? If it's just a cold email with just text, I'm always going to pass it by, right? It just won't take precedent over other stuff. So I could go into, I mean, I did a talk recently on literally like everything that needs to go into an email. Hi, sorry, yes, I am finishing right now. And I unfortunately can't do that one here, but email me and I can go over it with you and I can send you that slide deck for sure.
Cool. All right. Thank you very much.
All right. Be good.